Hi, everybody. Dave Chalmers, Chief Commercial Officer at LMN. Want to welcome you to our webinar today. George Urvari is going to be walking us through how to modify your budget in a new economy. Just one housekeeping item before we get started. In your toolbar, you will see the opportunity to ask a question. Feel free to ask your question at any point in time during today's presentation. We will bring those questions forward to George as best we can. If we don't get to them during the presentation, there's an opportunity at the end to address that as well. So let me just take a moment to introduce George to everybody. George is the co-founder of Oriole Landscaping. He started this business in 1986, focusing on designing and building landscape projects for homeowners across the Greater Toronto area. And over the past number of years, George has found that his awe for trees and nature in general has grown quite a bit during his time leading Oriole Landscaping. And after having viewed gardens from all over the world, he certainly knows that when done well and done right, gardens can certainly appreciate over time. And he brings this to the table each and every day with the many Oriole clients that his team works with. George has a natural business acumen, which helped him drive the development of his company from a very small service venture organization to one that now provides extensive and multifaceted outdoor living spaces. George is a regular speaker, teacher, consultant for the landscape industry, and most recently he's been traveling across the US coaching other companies, helping them implement budgeting, estimating, and planning. He's the former president of the Toronto chapter of Landscape Ontario, also recently certified as an LMN consultant, providing workshops again across North America, helping many owner operators and landscape contractors build a better business. So with that, George, I wanted to welcome you to the webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and we're excited to hear from you today.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody for joining. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you my actual company and what we're doing based on these ever-changing events. And basically we have a major goal, which is to reduce costs and obviously increase revenue. The big challenge is that now we're going to have less time to work because we're being delayed. So that's going to affect how much we can do in our cost structure. So from a goals perspective, really, it's about managing costs and cutting costs. So what I've done, if you look at the screen, you're going to see I've got an Oriole active budget that was from about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then I've got my COVID-19 budget, and so this happened quickly. So what I'm going to do is it's the same budget, it's just one of them is modified. So I'm going to open up the COVID-19 budget. And the first thing I'm going to do is, just like an income statement, I'm going to start with sales. So that's how much revenue your business is bringing in. So for most landscaping companies, you might have design build, you might have tender build, you might have maintenance, you might have enhancements, snow removal, irrigation, lighting, that type of thing. So my business is very similar. So I'm going to open this up. And we basically have broken our sales down into divisions. So we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Those are our basically revenue divisions. And then they're broken down into subcategories of sort of microcosms of that revenue stream. But for the purposes of budgeting, the first 2 lines here that have no numbers to them, it says COVID decline in sales. So we figure we're going to be doing about $1 million less in sales based on the current situation right now of work. And So we put in a negative number here. You'll see there's a negative there. So that negative number reflects a decrease. And rather than adjusting each one of these items, we just a large number for budgeting purposes to reflect that. The second thing that we did is the government is continually offering money, at least in Canada. I know I've got some American counterparts down there, so I'm sure there'll be some more programs for you. But that government money is actually a subsidy to our business. So they're going to subsidize our wages. So I've included that as revenue in our sales forecast. It actually normally would be handled in labor, but for purposes of making this simple and not adjusting every single employee, I've put a lump sum number in there. So in summary, our sales are going to be going down. And so the next trick is I'm going to go into field labor. And in field labor, the way we organize our accounts is by our crews. So if you look at this carefully, you'll see A01 or O1A, sorry, that is our first crew. And on that crew, it's a 3-man crew. There's an A employee, a B employee, and a C employee. And that represents foreman, lead hand, and skilled labor. Some of the other crews have a D, which means we just have a laborer. But basically, those are the positions in the company. And then we also have our payroll numbers here. And what we've done is we've zeroed out. In other words, we're counting on the fact that this crew will be shut down for the season. So if you go through our total number of crews here, you'll see we actually have 10 crews. And we're going to shut down some of the crews. So this particular field represents our total labor hours that we're going to sell, which is 50,695. And normally it's about 57,000. So we figure we're going to sell 7,000 hours less of labor this year because we can't work and there just won't be as much work. So the way we handle that is we just put a 0 beside the staff and then you get a $0 value. And that's how we manage the budget. So let's say this crew went back online again, then I would just simply put the employee back in place. The other thing that's interesting about this is that it allows me to switch crews, rotate people on crews, and understand who I may need to hire. So you'll see, for example, in O4D, it says question mark. So one of the things to consider is that I suspect that some of my staff are going to get sick. And as a result of that, the entire crew is going to be quarantined so that they can't work. And that's going to be one of the considerations that I'm going to show you how I'm handling a little further on. So in essence, we're going to reduce the amount of labor hours, and we may even consider doing pay cuts later on if we need to. We haven't got to that stage yet.
Hi, George. It's Dave. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in. We had a great question from one of the audience members. So maybe just before we move on to your workflow here, and sorry for the disruption, how are you determining your sales revenue specifically?
Okay, so we have a sales pipeline. So we're lucky because we have a lot of work that are existing projects that need completion. So at least for this year, we actually have work where the jobs are basically upside down. And because we're considered essential workers, currently with what's happening, we are allowed to work on those projects. In the meantime, we're also doing estimates for other projects because we don't want to just focus on what we have now. We need to focus on what we're going to have later. We're actually doing lots of estimates for projects that are in the pipeline, but that have not been contracted. So I hope that answers the question. So the next step that we're going to go to is in your income statement, and a budget is exactly like an income statement. The only difference is an income statement is an actual reflection of what happened that year for your company, and a budget is going to be a forecast of what's going to happen. So it's the same information. So if I click on my equipment, all my equipment is organized by trucks. So they're numbered as number 1, and I have 10 crews. And then I have my trailers, and then I have my AL stands for articulated loader, TL stands for track loader, PW stands for power wheelbarrow, and then we have all our excavators. So everything's organized by usage. So we use the truck first, then the trailer, then the skid steers, then the excavators. And we manage our equipment. Now, if you're lucky and you had a lease where you had a fleet rotation cycle, so in other words, you bring equipment on and you take equipment off every 4 years, so you're rotating your fleet, then this year, let's say you had a 4-year fleet rotation cycle, 25% of your equipment would come off lease. Unfortunately for our company, the truth of the matter is that we thought we were going to have the busiest year ever, and everything looked amazing, so we actually got some new equipment. So we're obligated to make those lease payments, and we don't have anything coming up on lease, unfortunately. It is true that you can try and sell equipment now. So I know the market's not great for that, but ironically, we sold a trailer last week for $5,000 that we paid $8,000 for in 2012. So just because you don't think you can sell something doesn't mean you shouldn't try, because there will be an opportunity. Somebody out there is always looking for something, and that's a good way to free up some cash flow. In my consulting, I've also dealt with quite a few companies, and the only ones that I know about that are having a good time right now is Caterpillar has actually deferred some of their payments on their equipment. And Caterpillar, I have to say, is amazing from that perspective. They are amazing for customer service. So whatever your vendor is, you may want to discuss deferring payments, until things settle a little bit and you can actually go out and work. I'm not sure what the regulations in the United States are in terms of when you can't work and who can't work, but it's a good idea to defer costs. Some of the tactics that we're looking at is sharing equipment with other companies that might be short of something, or renting them equipment. Obviously we want to sell any equipment that's idle. So luckily we have a pretty clean balance sheet, so we really don't have any equipment that just sits there and does nothing. We like to get rid of everything. And so going forward, you can see how valuable it is when you really only have what you need, and then leverage your partners like Caterpillar and the other large players to rent or lease equipment on a short term. So we really can't do much about reducing our equipment expense. Having said that, there are some positives. You notice here it says fuel costs. So our fuel costs have gone down for a couple of reasons. A, we're doing less work, and B, the fuel costs have gone down. So we're going to save about $10,000, I suspect, based on the current circumstance. Our repair expense will also go down, probably about $20,000 for our company. And we've also idled some of our trucks so that we're paying less insurance. So these are all things that are in your control to reduce costs. And on the equipment rental side, again, one of the things that you may want to consider with your peers in the industry is equipment sharing. Rather than renting something, you could conceivably, call up your friend and say, hey, do you have one of these? And barter back and forth to save some money. So those are my tips for equipment. And I think that would be very useful. So don't not try and sell something because you think nobody's going to buy it. It's amazing how there are buyers out there for things. And if everybody has the same mentality and you're the one who's going against the grain, you may actually be able to sell something. that you need to sell to raise some cash.
Hi, George. Sorry,
Go ahead, Dave.
Dave.
Yeah.
Dave just jumping in. Have a couple of questions here. Um, One from Shannon. Is this your budget for your construction division only, George, or does this include maintenance and snow as well?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is we don't do snow, so we do, but this is our global budget for our entire company. And what we do is rather than creating sub-budgets, we use our pricing strategy in element item catalog, which is over here, to create different cost structures for our business, but we basically share the same overhead. And the snow removal that we do is actually just hauling. And this year we didn't haul any snow, so that was zero. But we use one holistic budget. We don't break it down because we don't feel that, we have one maintenance crew that does, I think we were budgeting to do $400,000 in sales this year. It'll be a lot less now for one crew. And there's no point having a divisional budget for something that's such a small fraction of our overall sales.
That's great, George. That's great. One other question, and you may be getting to this, and our audience is obviously very eager to hear more from you, but you did share some great tips on equipment. What are you doing to improve your cash flow? I don't know, maybe prioritizing some of your projects, time and material work. If you could make some commentary there, I think there could be a lot, but without getting you off track, that would be great to hear from you today as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll touch on that right now. So we basically it's kind of like triage, to be honest with you. The customer that we know has money that will part with it quickly is front of the line. If it's an easy job, so it doesn't require a lot of logistics and materials coming from different places, that's a priority. The other thing that we're doing is we're doing a lot more time and materials. So when we do fixed price, believe it or not, I'll share this with you. We actually factor for about 40% of the labor cost as unbillable. And the reason for that is we have sometimes a shortened season. We have employees that are sick. We have, sometimes we have rain for weeks on end. We have things being stolen, equipment breakdowns, all kinds of things that cause us a lot of grief. We have builders that tell us they're ready when they're not. We show up, we can't work. We have clients changing their minds. So in our cost structure, we actually factor about 40% for unbillable hours in terms of our bill out rate. So what that literally translates into is if I bill out fixed price for bidding jobs at 85 bucks an hour, we are able to price those jobs by T&M or time and materials for $72 an hour because every hour is billable. The breaks are billable. If you forget something, it's billable. And it actually makes us more competitive and it makes it a lot easier to win clients. So a lot of our clients right now, I'd say almost 50% are time and material, and we offer that to all our clients up front. And we tell them if you don't trust us, then discount the bill. And we're not pricing it at zero. So in other words, I'm not taking 40% off the $85 an hour that we would bill. I'm going to take off, say, 20 or 25%. So I still have a 15% buffer. And the fact of the matter is, if you go to field labor, this is a good one, actually. Mark Bradley is renowned for making clear, is you're basically in the business of selling hours. So if you sold that 50,695 hours at your T&M bill out rate and you marked up your materials reasonably, you would make a lot of money. But we have to charge more for all of the unforeseen circumstances when we price. So that's typically how we handle that. And we're also doing some unique things, like we're trying to get other companies to rent space off of us for discounted rates during this this turmoil that we're going through. And that's also going to help us reduce costs. So we're really being creative and not just doing business as usual, and leveraging all of the peers that we have in the industry. And I'll jump ahead a little bit. One of the things that we're actually going to do, and I'll get down to it when I get to subcontractors, is we're actually going to look at subcontracting other companies to do work for us and get them to understand what their cost structure is, so they bill us out at a discounted rate, because I'm assuming, A, that some of my crews are going to go down because of this, and I also am assuming that some of my people do not want to work in this environment. So for example, let's say one of my foremen's 55 years old, his house is paid, he's saved money, he's been conservative. He's far less likely to work than, say, somebody who's 35 with a new house and lots of responsibilities, and they're older, obviously, so they're more susceptible to the coronavirus. So these are all things that we're going to be flexible going forward. The one good thing is there are going to be available companies to do work, and I would encourage you to actually reach out to your competitors, because some of them actually do have a lot of work. And it's not that some companies don't have work in the short term, like they're not booked far in advance. We're fortunate, we are, but those companies that aren't, if you can partner with other companies, you'd be amazed that in fact you can generate some revenue for yourself from these other companies. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is materials. And there's not too much I can do with respect to materials, to be honest with you. I need what I need. One tip for materials is, if you're still designing work and doing work for customers, you can use less expensive materials to make yourself more competitive. So one of the tricks that we do, and it works really well actually, we do really high-end landscapes, so it's not like I'm cheating or anything like that. But we take the least expensive 4x8 paver and flip it upside down and then band it with something nicer. So instead of paying $10 a square foot for the material, we pay $3 a square foot. There's more room for margin and you're more competitive, and it kind of gives the project a sort of a different look. So there are some creative things that you can do to reduce costs. One of the other things that you can do, for example, with respect to soil, is rather than excavating everything, you can scrape off a small layer and then mix in compost into the existing soil. So what that does is it reduces your labor costs, reduces your material costs, and it actually increases the labor that you can generate revenue on. So that's another simple tactic to keep more money for yourself rather than paying it out for materials. And I don't think I really have any more tips on materials.
George, maybe one item on material. When you talk about designing more creatively, I know you have a great example of the upside down Holland stone. And what about techniques and materials like Gator Base and others?
Right. Yeah, so that's actually a good one. Thanks for reminding me of that, Dave. So there's a new product that I've never personally used it, but it's called Gator Base, and it's the idea is that you basically dig out the topsoil, lay this material on a little bit of gravel, and then literally lay your bricks on top of it. So instead of excavating 8, 12 inches, you're excavating 4 inches, and again, it's a big labor saver. So the cost of the material is a bit more, but your labor costs are going to go down. And I suspect that your jobs will come in a lot less, especially if it's poor access. It's not for driveways, but for patios and things like that. And I know they use it in Canada and in Ottawa. I don't know if you're all familiar with Ottawa, but Ottawa is really cold. It's like minus 25, minus 30 sometimes. And the patios apparently hold up. They don't fall apart. So that's an interesting idea, again, to save labor when you're doing poor access projects. I don't think I have any much more to tell you about materials. Obviously, your material ratio is going to go down if your sales go down, so that's proportionate. So The next piece is subcontracting. And you'll notice here at the very top, I added this line. I'm actually budgeting $40,000 for other companies to do work for us. Again, for two reasons. One, either our own crews are down, or even some of our people are unwilling to work. And so that's a new challenge that I never thought I'd experience, but it is what it is. So, and then we obviously went through cutting costs, right? So we know we're not going to need as much engineering. You know, we're not going to need as many permits for work. In Toronto, you need permits for everything. And so, for example, right now, to be honest with you, if somebody wanted me to build a fence and I needed a permit because it was in an area where there's trees, normally it would take me 6 months to get a permit for that. I'm going to build the fence, and that's maybe not the right thing to do, but at this point we need to pay some bills. So I'll take the $500 fine and do that. So you didn't hear that. Same thing with masonry. We're not going to subcontract that as much concrete masonry. We'll do it in-house ourselves. So a lot of the things that you otherwise might have subcontracted, you may actually switch and do yourselves. So you know, running lighting for or running wiring for lighting, that type of stuff that we never do, I think we'll definitely consider doing. Partially just to make a make work project to keep the employees busy. Because at this point, I'm not really interested in making a profit. I'm just interested in making sure that we break even and find out what our absolute lowest dollar value that we can work for is to make sure that we're competitive. Dump trucks and trucking. So normally we sub out quite a bit of that. So we have our own big triaxle trucks. So, but we figure we'll be doing less work. So we've cut that a little bit as well. And same thing with carpentry, fencing, glass work. We're capable of doing all that stuff. Usually we don't have enough staff to do it, but this is again something we're going to switch over and start doing ourselves because we have the capacity to do it and the skill sets, and now we'll have the time. So all of this money will now be done in-house and keep our own people working. So that pretty much covers the subcontracting. The next piece is overhead. And L&N has done a great job in breaking down overhead into basically three categories. We have overhead wages, we have general overhead expenses, and we have overhead equipment. And so the overhead equipment is all the equipment that you use that the customer doesn't actually see on their job site. So for example, my pickup truck that I go and do estimates in is not directly costed to the job, it's in overhead. Same with my partner's pickup truck, my supervisors. And so I'll just click into that. And we're kind of stuck with these because we've made obligations to purchase these. Maybe the timing's not that great. You can see we have leased, some are financed, some are fully paid. And the good news is that our vehicle fuel costs are going to go down. Our insurance isn't going to go down, but our repair costs are going to go down because we're using the vehicles less, for sure. And we also have what's called a vehicle mileage allowance. So some of the employees we don't actually supply vehicles for, but we pay them a vehicle allowance. I haven't done it here in this budget, but I'm almost sure that we will cut that to reflect the ratio of what they're actually using the vehicles relative to the past is. So maybe that goes down to 5,000 or 4,000. We still need our people to go out and look at jobs and measure jobs and do base plans and all that other stuff, but they're working from home a lot more. So this is something that we are going to cut. And then we have our yard loader in our yard, obviously that is still necessary. So on the equipment side, really we're going to save money on fuel. If some of you that have leases that are expiring, you know, hand the vehicle back, obviously, or the equipment back if the lease is expiring, because I'm pretty sure for a year or two we're not going to see the same types of sales volume that we're used to. It's going to take a while for all this stuff to shake out. One good anecdote that I can share with you is I've been through two big recessions. In '87 we were in business, and we were in business in 2008. And ironically, people cocoon. September 11th, that was the other big one. People actually started spending more money on their landscaping and keeping the money at home rather than going to restaurants and traveling and things like that. So I think when the economy does start to rebound, we actually may be earlier to benefit than other industries, just because of the psychology of people spending time at home with the quarantines and all that stuff. They're going to have a nicer place to stay, and so I'm actually optimistic on the other side of this thing that we'll be the beneficiaries to some degree of what's happening, and that's been true historically. I've seen it happen now twice where things have improved for our industry, so that's encouraging. So on the overhead expenses, you'll see I put COVID here beside everything. So for example, supplies and tools, I put a COVID reduction. So this may be a reduction or a deferral. In other words, we're going to do without. In normal circumstances, we would spare no expense at giving our employees any possible tool or advantage. But in this circumstance, it's more about trying to sustain the business and reduce costs. So it's more of a life support kind of thing. So we've allotted for spending less money on new tools. So this is things like shovels and rakes and things like that. We'll find a way to work with less and make do, and maybe we can even cut that number further. So obviously our overhead fuel is going to go down. We're going to spend less money on fuel for all the I've basically been at home for 2 weeks, and I think I've driven my vehicle maybe 20 miles in the last week, and I would normally drive 200 miles. So there's going to be some savings there. Vehicle licensing fees. We actually bought more trucks, but this one also, you can de-sticker your trucks, and the trucks that are sitting idle, obviously that's easy money to not pay. Basically, what you should do is take your license plates off the trucks, and then idle the trucks. Same thing with insurance on those vehicles that are idle. You can not take all the insurance off, because obviously if it gets stolen or somebody torches it or something, you're going to want to cover the costs. But the actual driving liability portion you can cancel, because you won't be driving the vehicle. If your vehicle's worthless, in other words, it's like a $3,000 or $4,000 piece of equipment that's kind of nostalgic or something, then I wouldn't bother insuring it at all. It's not worth it. The chances of something happening are slim, and you're not relying on it anyway. So these are a bunch of other expenses. So the ones that I put COVID beside, obviously, normally we have a Christmas party every year, and so this year I just don't think we're going to have a Christmas party, quite frankly. So again, that goes straight to the bottom line to help the company. Maybe we'll have a virtual cocktail party or something like that using the new technology for the holidays. But again, those are in normal circumstances, very important investments to work on the morale. But in these circumstances, I think everybody would understand that it probably would be frowned upon as well if you had these lavish Christmas parties. And
George.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Dave here. I agree completely on those overhead expenses with the parties. A couple of questions that have come in with respect to overhead. The first one is you yourself, George, are you going to find yourself back in the field working, doing projects as required? That's sort of number one. And then number two, do you have a project manager today that oversees multiple crews? That project manager, if they're on salary, would you recommend putting them into overhead, because it may be a little more difficult to build them out hourly? What are your thoughts on yourself and what your seeing as that owner operator maybe going back into the field for some projects, and then your project manager on salary, that specific overhead question.
Yeah, so the first question was whether I myself will go back in the field, and the answer is absolutely. So, for example, on the maintenance, if well, right now, to be honest with you, my maintenance foreman doesn't want to work. He's a phenomenal person, so I can't hold it against him. He lives in an apartment building, and he's literally worried about going in the elevator and getting the virus when somebody else goes up the elevator. And he's got a wife and 2 kids. And so I will drive the maintenance truck and do the maintenance with people that are prepared to work. So I myself absolutely would step in. In terms of my project managers, absolutely. I will make sure that they get their hands dirty too. And if you've already priced the job and they don't have work to do in the office, then if they're critical path employees, then for sure you have 2 options. You can yourself step in and have them cover for you, or you can have them do a hybrid role where they're doing work in the field and also doing blue collar work. And I'm pretty sure in these times, all of our jobs basically rely on our businesses, keeping the businesses afloat, including the owners and every employee. So I would encourage having a powwow with all of your key staff and say, look, if things get tough, we need to make sure that we cover costs and some of those overhead costs where you're normally sitting in the office, because there's not as many estimates to do, but we do have work. We're hoping that you would jump in and help us. And I'm pretty sure you're going to get some really good compliance with that. So that's a great question and a great situation that can be resolved with using your office staff. Again, lowering your overhead, right? So they move from overhead to direct costs. And even if you're doing time and material, you can build them out for time and material. Or if it's fixed cost, you're just basically substituting an existing employee, and maybe that employee gets laid off and that key office person goes in the field and works. So those are all going to be difficult decisions to make, but necessary ones as we go through this virus. I mean, again, it depends on which jurisdiction you are in, whether you're in a rural area. All these things will factor into the decision tree that you're going to make, how much work you have, how much work you need to get in the future. So you might be in the middle of important bids for work that's down the pipe, and you can't just abandon those. You can't basically sacrifice tomorrow for today. You have to balance both. You have to focus on today, obviously what's in front of you, that's urgent, but you also have to keep an eye on the future, ensure you have more work down the pipe. So hopefully that answers that question. So basically, yeah, all the things like obviously donations, we're not going to be giving to charity this year. Looks like we're going to be the charity. My home office expense was more of a tax piece where we would be able to get tax back as an expense for an office expense. Obviously, I'm not going to charge the company money this year for using my home office. So that's cut out as well. And we were also going to do training videos for our business. And again, that's on hold as well. So we won't really do any company improvements at all. It's more about just doing work. In terms of warranty, we budgeted about $30,000 for warranty. And if things die, we still have to do the warranty work for our customers. The good news is we have an excuse this year that there may be no plants available. So those costs might be deferred till we get past the bump. And I think everybody would understand that, that dead shrub in the front of the house can wait. It's not worth getting sick over. So this number we could reduce. I haven't done it yet, but that would be my COVID-2 budget. So that would be my red alert budget, where I start going through this same process and reducing some more costs anywhere I can. And then on the wages side, so I'll show you our wages. So what we do is we have salaries. And then when our company does well, we give ourselves bonuses. So based on the profit of the business. And this particular budget that I've done here still has an 8.4% profit. So there's a lot more cutting I can do to get to zero. I can still survive at zero, no problem. I'm going to see whether I can get away with an 8.4% profit. And then another week or 2 weeks from now, depending on what happens, I'll revise the budget once again to see how low I can go. And so my wage, my business partners and my wage, basically we list everything in terms of positions, and we may have to lay off, for example, one of our operations managers if we're that slow. And again, that's an ugly bridge that we may want to cross when we get to it, or have them go out in the field and work. Those are going to be the two choices when push comes to shove, to make sure that the business is sustainable. So I obviously did that. That's the ugliest piece, the last piece, which is the labor. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the budget. And again, we have some room here. I can still lower my price $471,000 and still get work and still be viable. So it's a great idea to go through this exercise and go to your budget and basically go to the budget. Okay, changes. Go to the budget and then basically make a copy of your budget. For those of you that don't have LMN, a little tougher to do, but I think you're able to get access to the LMN account. It's very powerful stuff. And you copy the budget, you create a new budget, you rename the budget, and then you would have your Amber Alert, and the next one would be COVID-19 Red Alert. So that's when I'm basically going to be running at 0% profit. So that's pretty much how we're going to manage our budget to get through this thing. And it's going to be tough, but doable for sure. Yeah.
That's great, George. Really appreciate that overview. Obviously, we'll allow all of the participants and attendees to ask questions if they need to. One item, George, if you can just provide some context, some guidance, some coaching. How often are you looking at your numbers? How often are you going in right now and analyzing your budget? Is it daily? Do you look at it once a month? Special circumstances, how often are you running your numbers?
So we'll be going to weekly now, for sure. And then it's all about cuts, to be honest with you. It's all about cuts and cash flow. If I could summarize it that way, you got to improve cash flow and you have to cut costs. And the sooner that you make the cuts, the more money that you're going to have later on down the pipe. So it's going to be drastic. Our biggest limitation, every company's going to have different scenarios. So some people have work in the pipeline but can't do the work. Some people have work in the pipeline now but don't have future work in the pipeline. And so your strategy will be determined by what your biggest problem is. But for sure, any unnecessary expenses should be cut immediately. And then you basically go to your labor. This is going to be an opportunity also when this is all said and done to pick up some new talent, because there's going to be other companies that have great employees that are not working through no fault of their own. Like a month ago, our biggest fear was we're going to lose staff to other industries. Now that's not an issue, and I don't see it in the future. So ironically, you might be able to upgrade your staff as this process goes on because there's going to be so much available talent. So there are some silver linings in all of this. The key is to be aggressive in the cost cutting because you can't wait, for sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, George. we have up on the screen the forms library, and I know that you've done an amazing job at framing this particular aspect of your organization. Um, can you make mention to the audience as to why all of these forms and these pieces are important to you as you go about not just managing the business, but more importantly, what we're talking about here today, making adjustments?
Right. So, for example, for those of you that don't do cash flow projections, I'm fortunate I don't have to do them anymore, but I have a controller that does that. But you want to basically figure out how long you can go based on your receivables, your cash on hand, and your expenses and your direct job costs. So you know, let's say they shut you down completely, it would be a good idea to know I can go 3 months, 4 months, 1 month, 2 weeks, and then you can basically plan the cuts that you need to make in accordance with that. These are, I always talk about risk and uncertainty, and there's a big difference between risk and uncertainty. This is actually true uncertainty. From one day to the next, you don't know what's going to happen, but there are a lot of things in your control. And if you're proactive and you have to make some really tough decisions, for sure. Cash is king right now. So anybody that has cash on hand is in a good position, or anybody that actually is almost nobody owns all their own equipment. But if you did have a farm that you worked on and you own your equipment, or you have great relationships with your vendors, you're in a better cash flow position than, say, our company that rents our facility and has lots of leases. But there still are a lot of cuts that we can make. In terms of being efficient, there's a lot of forms in here. Like those of you that are not familiar with Kaizen, they have business improvement procedures. So if you have time now, you can actually start looking at things that you can implement to make your business more efficient and more productive. There is health and safety is massive right now, to make sure that you have proper protocols and procedures for making sure that your employees stay safe. Legal and insurance. So there's huge liability for companies now if they just, are kind of cowboys. And Element has all of those forms and documents in their forms library, and they really are there to make your business professional. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Literally every form and document that you probably ever wanted in your business, to be honest with you, is in that document library. And they would be very, very useful in this time. I would say the cash flow projections would be the most useful for those of you that don't do them in this time, because the cash flow is going to be unpredictable. So you might as well forecast out scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. And back to that, you can create 3 budgets, scenario A, scenario B, scenario C now, and literally have it ready to go. So you're not actually changing the budget as you go. You literally have them ready to go in advance, and you go, you know what, we're going to budget C because this is the circumstance. And that'll help you make intelligent decisions. I would also recommend that you can actually number, if you want to put numbers beside your budget, for those of you that are Element users, to prioritize number 1 or A, B, C, something like that, to prioritize what cuts you're going to make. And then it's less emotional and more sort of rational. I think being rational is the biggest thing right now. Very important to stay calm and collected and cool and make some tough choices. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, George. Really appreciate the purposeful intent and the reality that you brought to the webinar today in managing your budget. Any closing comments? Anything that you'd like to share before we depart for the day?
Sure. I think the first point is that you've got to be strategic. So that's your overall picture of what's going on, and the budget on the financial side ties into that. I think in terms of being strategic, again, partnering with other companies, reaching out to your competitors, building relationships. You know, we're all the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I'm a big believer in that. Our landscape association has got all kinds of webinars and things like that to give guidance through this basically crazy time. And then tactically, you've got to make decisions on the fly, and you can't wait. Right now, normally you can delay decisions. I think right now the best advice I can give you is to make sure that you're tactical and that you prioritize the decisions that you're going to make that are upcoming when they come, and just pull the trigger. You know, there's the concept of paralysis by analysis, and that's not what you need in crisis management. You're going to make mistakes, no question, but the cost of not making decisions will far outweigh some of the mistakes that you might make. And I think that's probably how I would leave it. Yeah.
That's great, George. Well, we certainly appreciate your time. We had one more slide that we wanted to share with all of the attendees today, just letting them know a little bit more about some of the avenues in which they can connect with LMN and get more content and tools. We've moved all of our learning online. So for those companies that we've had a chance to work with, you know that providing ongoing education to help talented landscapers build better businesses is a significant goal and focus of ours at LMN. So in 2020, we've launched our online academy. Opportunities continue to expand. So we've moved our workshops online for greater access worldwide. Online Academy continues to provide companies with a really incredible education platform to help your staff and companies achieve the goals and initiatives that you need to tackle. And then we've enhanced customer support through chat, email, phone. Our crew is really attentive right now to the client dialogues, and we're focused on helping everybody get through this. So I just wanted to thank you, George, once again. Really appreciate you taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to work with us today. This recording will be shared with all of the attendees, as well as George's contact information. George, thanks for the partnership and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.